Story 1. The Tinder Nightmare. Part 1. The Beginning of the Date. I downloaded Tinder out of sheer boredom and loneliness. It had been a tough year, and after the world started returning to normal post-pandemic, I figured I'd give online dating another shot. My previous experiences on the app were uneventful but harmless. I met a few nice people, but nothing ever clicked. This time, I matched with someone who stood out. Her name was Haley, a blonde with striking features and a playful smile in her pictures. She seemed friendly and a little quirky, which intrigued me. Our conversations were light but engaging, and after a few days of chatting, we decided to meet in person. Here's where things got strange. Haley insisted that we meet at my house instead of going out somewhere public. At first, I hesitated, offering excuses about my place being messy or wanting to get out myself. But she wouldn't let it go. She bluntly said she wouldn't meet me unless it was at my house. Looking back, this was a glaring red flag, but loneliness has a way of clouding judgment. I told myself she was probably just shy or nervous about going out in public. Plus, she was beautiful, and I was tired of being alone. So, I reluctantly agreed. I spent the next couple of hours cleaning up, showering, and trying to calm my nerves. When she texted that she had arrived, I let her in. The moment she walked through the door, I felt an odd tension. She looked different. Not drastically so, but something about her wasn't the same as in her photos. Maybe it was the lighting or the lack of filters, I thought. We sat down to chat, and despite my initial unease, the conversation flowed smoothly enough. Then, Haley asked if I had anything to drink, specifically alcohol. I mentioned that I had a half bottle of Jameson whiskey in the cupboard. She smiled and asked if I'd mind making us drinks. Feeling polite, I excused myself to the bathroom first. When I returned, Haley was sitting on the couch with a drink in her hand. On the coffee table in front of her, there was another drink, presumably prepared for me. Something felt off. Part 2. The Drink and the Descent. I wasn't in the mood for liquor, so I grabbed a beer from the fridge instead. Haley kept urging me to drink the cocktail she had made, insisting I'd like it. Her persistence only heightened my paranoia. I couldn't shake the thought that something might be wrong with the drink. After a few beers, though, my nerves started to dull. Her constant encouragement wore me down, and against my better judgment, I took a sip of the cocktail. It tasted normal, nothing unusual. Still, I felt uneasy but brushed it off as my imagination running wild. It wasn't long before I began to feel strange. At first, I thought I was just getting drunk, but this wasn't the usual buzz from alcohol. My limbs felt heavy, my vision blurred, and the room started to spin. I remember trying to stand but collapsing back onto the couch. The last thing I saw was Haley's face, smiling down at me as the world faded to black. When I woke up, the faint light of dawn was streaming through the window. I was lying on my bedroom floor, and my entire body ached. My head throbbed, and there was a metallic taste in my mouth. As I struggled to sit up, I noticed the blood. Part 3. The Horrifying Discovery. My arms and stomach were covered in deep cuts, some of which looked like stab wounds. Bruises covered my torso, and the pain was unbearable. Blood stained the floor in bed, and when I looked at the wall, I froze. A pentagram had been drawn in blood, my blood. I tried to piece together what had happened, but my mind was foggy. The room was in disarray, as if a tornado had ripped through it. My phone was gone, along with my wallet, my TVs, and even the safes where I kept cash and valuables. Panicking, I staggered through the house. Every room was trashed, with broken windows and graffiti scrawled on the walls. It looked like someone, or multiple people, had ransacked the place. Then, I noticed something even more chilling. In the living room, there were faint drag marks on the floor, leading from the couch to my bedroom. My stomach turned as I realized I must have been dragged while unconscious. Part 4. Calling for help. Desperate, I searched for a way to call for help. My primary phone was gone, but I remembered an old phone I had stashed in a drawer. I found it, plugged it in, and prayed it would still work. Once it powered on, I connected to Wi-Fi and called a friend using a messaging app. When the police arrived, I told them everything I could remember. They confirmed that I had been drugged, likely with a powerful tranquilizer. I logged into my Tinder account, hoping to find Haley's profile, but it was gone. She had unmatched me, and her account was likely deleted. The police believed I had been targeted by a group, possibly for a robbery or something more sinister. They couldn't find any leads, and to this day, no arrests have been made. Part 5. The aftermath. I moved out of that house shortly after the incident. The memories were too traumatic to stay. My new home is equipped with security cameras and an alarm system. It gives me some peace of mind, but the fear lingers. I can't shake the image of Haley's face, the way she smiled before I blacked out. Was she working alone, or was there someone else in the house that night? The police think there might have been multiple people involved, but without evidence, there's no way to know for sure. I haven't used Tinder or any dating apps since that night. The experience left me scarred, both physically and emotionally. Sometimes I wonder if Haley, or whoever she really was, is still out there looking for her next victim. Story 2. The Forest Church. Part 1. Return to the Woods. When I was a kid growing up in Ohio during the 70s, my best friend Joe and I spent almost every weekend exploring the woods near his family's farm. We built forts, set traps, and pretended we were frontiersmen living off the land. Those memories, simple as they were, became some of the best times of my life. Years later, Joe and I had gone our separate ways after high school, but we stayed in touch. Every once in a while, we'd find time to reminisce about the good old days. One summer in the late 90s, we both happened to be visiting our hometown at the same time. Nostalgia took over after a few beers, and we decided to relive our childhood by hiking the old railroad tracks we used to follow. It was supposed to be a fun little adventure, just a day out in the woods, camping overnight, and heading home the next morning. We'd been on those tracks 100 times before, so we figured it'd be safe. But Joe suggested something different. Instead of taking our usual route, we'd explore in the opposite direction. The morning of our hike was perfect. The weather was warm, but not too hot, and the forest had that fresh, earthy smell I'd missed so much. As we walked, we talked about the past, laughing over stupid things we'd done as kids. Hours passed before we came across something unexpected. It was a building, a small, sagging structure, barely visible through the trees. At first, we thought it might be an old sugar shack, but as we got closer, we realized it was something else entirely. It was a church. Part 2. The Church in the Woods. The church was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Its wooden planks were blackened with moss and rot, and the cross on top was warped and weathered. The windows were long gone, leaving empty, gaping holes that seemed to watch us as we approached. Joe and I hesitated at the tree line, unsure if we should go any closer. There was no path leading to the building, no sign that anyone had been here in decades. It felt abandoned, yet it gave off a strange energy that made my skin crawl. "Think anyone's home?" Joe joked, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. We decided to check it out, staying quiet as we approached. Peering inside one of the window frames, we saw rows of broken pews, all facing a raised platform where a preacher would have stood. The floor was littered with debris, fallen branches, animal bones, and something that looked like melted wax. Despite the sunlight filtering through the empty windows, the place felt suffocating. Neither of us wanted to go inside. "Let's head back," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Joe nodded, and we quickly retreated up the hill we'd come down. The church disappeared from view as we returned to our chosen campsite a few hundred yards away, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Part 3. Night Falls. As dusk settled over the forest, we set up our hammocks and built a small fire. The church was out of sight, but not out of mind. We tried to laugh off our unease, chalking it up to the natural creepiness of finding an abandoned building in the middle of nowhere. The night was still, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. We talked for a while, sharing stories and enjoying the quiet. But then we heard it, singing. At first, it was faint, almost like a whisper carried on the wind. But it grew louder, until there was no mistaking it. The sound was coming from the direction of the church. "You hear that?" Joe whispered. I nodded, my stomach tightening. It sounded like a choir, their voices rising and falling in unison. But the melody was unfamiliar, and the words didn't sound like English, or any language I recognized. We slid out of our hammocks and crouched low, straining to hear. The singing continued, haunting and beautiful in a way that made my chest ache. "We need to check this out," Joe said. I wanted to say no, but my curiosity got the better of me. We crept up the hill as quietly as we could, moving like we used to when sneaking around the woods as kids. When we reached the top, we saw a flickering light coming from inside the church. Part 4. The Ritual. Candles illuminated the interior, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Figures moved inside, their shapes blurred by the glow. There were at least a dozen of them, all standing or kneeling around the raised platform at the front of the church. The singing stopped abruptly, replaced by a single, booming voice. It was a man, chanting in a deep, guttural tone that made my heart race. Though I couldn't understand the words, the cadence was unmistakable. It was a sermon. Then the congregation responded in unison, their voices rising in a strange, discordant harmony. Joe and I exchanged a look, both of us wide-eyed and terrified. We'd stumbled upon something we weren't meant to see. The chant reached a crescendo, and the figures began to move. One by one, they filed out of the church, holding hands and carrying candles. Their procession was silent now, save for the soft crunch of leaves underfoot. And they were heading straight for us. Part 5. The chase Joe grabbed my arm, and we bolted down the hill, not caring how much noise we made. Behind us, the flickering lights grew brighter, accompanied by the sound of footsteps. We reached the tracks and ran as fast as we could. our breath coming in ragged gasps. The lights followed us, moving erratically, as if the people holding them were running too. After what felt like an eternity, the lights disappeared. We didn't stop until we reached a road, where we flagged down a passing car. Later, we told ourselves it was probably just some kids messing around. But deep down, I knew better. Those voices, that chanting, it wasn't something kids could fake. I haven't been back to those woods since. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear that haunting melody in my dreams. Story 3, The Catfish Nightmare. Part 1, The Escape Plan. It was the summer after I graduated high school, and I was desperate for an escape. Life at home was suffocating. My father was overbearing, controlling, and emotionally abusive. He wouldn't let me have friends, took the door off my bedroom hinges for discipline, and demanded that I spend every waking hour either helping him around the house or staying out of his way. The only reprieve came from the smartphone he finally got me a month before. It wasn't a gift. It was more of a tool for him to keep tabs on me. He checked it every night at 8 p.m., so I learned to delete anything that might set him off. One app I always deleted was Tinder. Tinder was my little secret, a way to connect with the outside world and feel like I was more than just a prisoner. That's how I met Alex. He was 28, charming and confident. He made me feel seen, which was something I desperately craved. We started talking every chance I got. He made me feel special. And when I told him about my situation at home, he said the words I'd been longing to hear. You're an adult now. You don't have to stay there. You can leave. He offered to pick me up that very night. I was terrified, but excited. The idea of leaving everything behind was both thrilling and overwhelming. I told him I wasn't ready to leave permanently, but I'd meet him just to hang out. He agreed and promised to have me back home by 4 a.m., well before my dad woke up. Part 2, A Silent Driveway. I gave Alex specific instructions. Park on the side of the road, don't pull into the driveway, and text me when he arrived. My dad's house was secluded, surrounded by trees, a long gravel driveway that echoed every sound. I couldn't risk him hearing. At exactly 12:05 a.m., Alex texted, "I'm here." I grabbed my shoes, climbed out of my bedroom window, and started walking down the driveway. The night was eerily quiet, save for the crunch of gravel under my feet. I expected to see his car's headlights at the end of the driveway. But as I got closer, there was nothing. No car, no lights. Then I heard it, a faint whispering coming from the trees. I stopped, straining to listen. A burst of laughter broke the silence, followed by hushed voices. Part 3. The whispering woods panic began to set in. Was Alex playing a prank on me? Or was someone else out here? I crept forward, staying close to the tree line. The whispers grew louder, and then I heard something that made my blood run cold. A man's voice, low and guttural, said, "She's coming. We'll grab her and take her to the cabin. You hold her down first." I froze. Then another voice replied, "She won't even scream once we start. Let's keep her alive for a while, though. It's more fun that way." Every instinct told me to run, but I was too terrified to move. My mind raced as I tried to figure out what to do. If I turned back now, they'd see me. I decided to slip into the woods and hide. I knew the area well enough to navigate it in the dark, and I had a spot in mind. A cluster of trees with a hollowed-out log where I used to hide as a kid. Part 4. The Hideout. I crouched inside the hollow log, holding my breath and listening intently. The voices faded, but my phone buzzed in my pocket, nearly giving me a heart attack. It was Alex. "Where are you?" I turned off the ringer and ignored it. Minutes passed, and then he called. I knew if I didn't answer, he might start looking for me, so I picked up. "Where the hell are you?" he demanded. "I can't come tonight," I lied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm sorry. Something came up." There was silence on the other end. Then, his tone shifted. The charm was gone, replaced by venom. "You're wasting my time," he hissed. "Think anyone else will ever want you? You're lucky I even bothered with you." He hung up, but not before delivering one final threat. "I know where you live. Don't forget that." Part 5. The aftermath. I stayed in the log until I was sure he was gone. When I finally crept back to the house, my dad was still asleep, oblivious to the nightmare I'd just escaped. The next morning, I called my grandmother and told her everything. She came to pick me up while my dad was at work, and I never went back. I later learned from the police that Alex, or whatever his real name was, had a history of targeting young girls. They couldn't press charges without proof, but they warned me to stay vigilant. I haven't touched a dating app since. Every now and then, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't overheard those whispers. Would I have ended up in that cabin they mentioned? Or worse? Story 4. The Fake Friend. Part 1. A Familiar Stranger. It was my second year in college when I decided to try Tinder again. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just bored and hoping to meet new people. After a few swipes, I matched with someone unexpected. Claire. We went to the same high school, but never really spoke. She was part of the same friend group as me, though our school was small enough that everyone knew each other. Claire wasn't particularly popular, but she was friendly enough that people liked her. It felt oddly coincidental that we hadn't talked before, and she didn't seem to think much of it. We exchanged a few messages, and then out of nowhere, she asked if I wanted to hang out that night. I was surprised by her confidence, but intrigued. "Come by my place after 11, she said. "I'll be alone. Oh, and if you can, bring some weed." I didn't smoke, but I knew a few friends who could hook me up. I stopped by one of their places, picked up a small bag, and made my way to the address Claire had given me. Part 2. The Wrong House. As I drove through the neighborhood, I began to feel uneasy. The houses became more and more rundown, with peeling paint and broken windows. I checked the address again. Matched. When I pulled up to the house, my stomach sank. It looked abandoned. The porch sagged, the yard was overgrown, and there was only one light on, shining dimly from an upstairs window. I hesitated, wondering if I had the wrong place. Then, as if reading my mind, Claire sent me a message. "I see you. Come on in." Every instinct told me to leave, but I convinced myself I was being paranoid. I parked the car, grabbed the weed, and walked up to the porch. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and mildew. The living room was dark, the furniture old and stained. Faint music played from upstairs, a mix of death metal and eerie chanting. "Hello, Claire," I called out. No response. Part 3. The Upstairs Door. The light from the upstairs room flickered as I climbed the creaking staircase. My anxiety grew with every step. When I reached the top, I found 2 doors. One was slightly ajar with the music coming from inside, and the other, a bathroom, was dark and empty. "Claire?" called again, my voice shaking. The music stopped abruptly. Footsteps thudded on the hardwood floor behind the closed door, followed by hushed whispers. "Ethan," a female voice called out sweetly. "I'm glad you made it." I froze. The voice sounded familiar, but not quite like Claire's. The door creaked open, and a woman stepped out. She looked nothing like Claire. Her makeup was heavy and gothic, her long black hair tangled. Before I could say anything, she smiled. "Come in," she said, gesturing to the room. Behind her, I saw two men, both dressed in black with pale faces. One of them grinned at me, revealing crooked yellow teeth. I stammered, I think I have the wrong house." The woman's smile faltered. "Don't be silly," she said. "You're exactly where you're supposed to be." Part 4. Fight or flight. I turned to leave, but a man blocked the stairs. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially obscured by shadow. "Stay a while," he said, his voice low and menacing. Panic took over. I darted into the bathroom, slamming the door shut and locking it. They banged on the door, laughing and taunting me. My hands shook as I searched for something. Anything I could use as a weapon. The best I could find was a toothbrush, its end sharp enough to stab. I looked around for another escape. The bathroom window was small, but it might work. I climbed into the tub, opened the window, and squeezed through, cutting my arms on the broken glass. I landed on the roof, nearly slipping before catching my balance. Below, I saw a trampoline in the backyard. It was my only way down. I jumped. Part 5. The escape. The trampoline cushioned my fall, and I sprinted to my car without looking back. My heart pounded as I fumbled for the keys, half expecting them to chase after me. I drove straight to the police station, shaking as I told them what happened. Sent officers to the address, but by the time they arrived, the house was empty. What they found inside filled me to the bone. The walls were covered in satanic symbols, and the upstairs room was filled with knives, ropes, and bloodstains. Worse, they discovered two bodies, young women about my age, mutilated beyond recognition. The group, who called themselves Holy Eternity, was known for using dating apps to lure victims. While 2 members were arrested, the others remain at large. I never used Tinder again. Every time I think about that night, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't jumped out that window. Would I have ended up like the women they found? Story 5. The Cult on My Property. Part 1. Strange Encounters. I own a remote property in rural Alabama. Over 60 acres of land with an abandoned house, a barn, and a greenhouse deep in the woods. The house and barn are close together, but the greenhouse is tucked far away, almost hidden among the trees. One evening, my friend and I were setting up film equipment in the house. We planned to shoot a video the next day, but as the hours dragged on, my friend began to feel uneasy. "This place gives me the creeps," he admitted. We decided to sleep in my truck that night, parked near the barn. While I fell asleep quickly, my friend stayed awake, keeping watch. Around 4 a.m., he woke me in a panic. "There are people outside," he whispered. I sat up, groggy and confused. He pointed toward the barn, where shadows moved in the faint moonlight. A group of 7 or 8 hooded figures was walking around the property. One of them stopped and stared directly at my truck. My windows were tinted, so they couldn't see us, but the figure lingered for a long moment before returning to the group. We didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Part 2. A Grisly Discovery. At dawn, We ventured back into the house to check our equipment. What we found sent chills down my spine. The lights we'd set up were smashed, papers were burned, and objects were vandalized. In one of the rooms, we found candles arranged in a circle and a dead cat nailed to the wall. Around it, someone had drawn a pentagram in dried blood. We decided to search the barn and the surrounding area for more signs of what had happened. That's when we found decayed animal corpses. Horses, cattle, birds, and even a bat, all arranged in disturbing ways. Near the barn, there was a shallow burial site with what looked like a decomposed human hand sticking out of the dirt. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Part 3. The Pigs on Crosses. A week later, we returned to the property during the day, thinking things might have quieted down. What we found was even worse. Near the house, 3 pigs had been crucified on makeshift wooden crosses. Their heads were decapitated and placed on the ground in front of the crosses. Someone had painted grotesque faces on the heads and sewn wigs into their scalps. The ground around the crosses was scorched, with large circular burn marks as if a fire had been set there. My friend was certain the hooded figures we'd seen earlier were behind it. We spent hours burying the pigs and cleaning up the mess, but the unease never left us. Part 4. The Intruder in the Barn. We returned one evening to ride dirt bikes and ATVs, thinking the property was finally safe. After parking in the barn, my friend froze. "There's someone in there," he whispered. I followed his gaze and saw a shadowy figure sitting in the hay. First, the man didn't move. Then he slowly raised a hand and waved at us, as if mocking our presence. I grabbed a flashlight and walked closer. But by the time I reached the spot, the man was gone. When I looked up toward the second story of the barn, I spotted him lying down on a pile of hay. "Are you okay?" I asked, trying to stay calm. He replied, "Leave me alone. I'm just trying to sleep." Though it was my property, I decided not to press the issue. Something about him felt off. Part 5. The Greenhouse Camp. 2 weeks later, we returned with weapons, determined to confront whoever was trespassing. As we approached the greenhouse, we saw figures running into the woods. Inside the greenhouse, we found evidence of a makeshift camp. Clothes, books, and small animal carcasses. The smell was putrid, and the walls were smeared with what looked like dried blood. In the corner, we found an altar surrounded by tall, melted candles. Knives, ropes, and other tools lay scattered around it. I called the police, who investigated, but found no one. They told me they had already been searching the area for 2 suspects who had kidnapped a 9-year-old boy. Though they couldn't link the suspects to my property, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were connected. I haven't been back to that property in months. Even now, I wonder if the group is still there, or if they've moved on to another victim's land.